Apple's EC level has rocketed higher to 76, up from 55, which on face value makes Apple an expensive stock to buy right now. However, when one actually looks under the hood at what's going on at Apple, then one finds a reason why Apple has been bid up to such lofty levels, where its current price, even after the recent correction, is more than double where the stock was trading during March. The answer lies in Apple's 2-year transition away from using former best buddy Intel CPUs, which has started off with a bang, following the launch of the M1 MacBook laptops just a few days ago. What's the M1? It's Apple ditching Intel for its all-in-one chip SOC. That includes an 8-core CPU, 8-core GPU, 16-core neural engine and memory, all on one SOC die that is basically a souped up version of the A14 chips found in iPads and iPhones. What does this mean? Well, it means that Apple has actually innovated for a change rather than bamboozling its followers with marketing hype. Though there's still plenty of marketing hype coming out of Apple. Nevertheless, the M1 results in a huge performance increase due to reduction in latency between components such as the CPU, GPU and memory, as these are now all burnt onto the same 5nm M1 chip. In terms of benchmarks, Apple's M1 MacBook performance, depending on what test one runs, ranges from a boost of between 30% to 100% over the preceding Intel based MacBooks, whilst at the same time delivering a whopping 50% increase in battery life. So contrary to much pre-launch skepticism out there that the first generation of M1 MacBooks would fail to deliver due to being Apple Silicon's first generation devices, i.e. the first attempt, which instead were expected to lay the groundwork for the real innovations in later generations of Apple processors. Instead, Apple has delivered a further driven a nail in Intel's coffin, as Apple Mac computers to be launched during 2021 will be based on the same M1 technology and are thus likely to deliver similar performance increases over the use of separate components, i.e. for instance Intel CPU, Nvidia or AMD GPUs and a plethora of memory suppliers, which are now all on one Apple M1 chip. Furthermore, there is a huge reduction in costs of manufacturers, illustrated when one disassembles an M1 MacBook Pro that boils down to 2 small PCBs. Though on the downside, Apple has completely erased the ability of users to upgrade anything on their systems, as there are no expansion ports. So choose your specs carefully, as you cannot add anything later, not even an SSD. And here's what's inside an M1 Mac mini computer that costs $700. Even more sparsely populated, with again absolutely nothing that's remotely upgradable. Effectively an iPad in a small computer case. How did Apple achieve this apparent performance miracle? Well, the trend was in motion for over a decade, where it all boils down to the failure of Intel to innovate. They've been stuck at 14nm for at least 7 years probably, which has allowed others such as Apple to both catch up and now pass Intel in terms of processing power of mobile chips compared to Intel CPUs, as the graph illustrates, though in reality it would be better to label the graph Intel versus ARM, because that's what Apple CPUs are, ARM based. Take another look at the graph. From 2015 to 2020, Intel processors have improved by about 40% in performance, which is pretty poor compared to the way CPUs were going before 2015, whilst Apple processors have improved by 200% in performance. However, even that does not tell the whole picture. For instance, the 10900K out of the box consumes 125 watts of power, whilst the better performing A14 Apple chip consumes just 5 watts. Hence, Intel requires being plugged into a main socket with a lot of cooling to dissipate all of that heat given off, and if you overclock you can double that wattage. Near double. Whilst Apple works in small mobile devices working off batteries, all without any active cooling necessary, no noisy fans in there, and unlike an Intel machine which will have the fans ramping up whenever the CPU goes under load. So basically, Apple M1 MacBooks are now effectively large smartphones comprising as few as possible discrete components so as to maximize efficiency and cost of production. Technology that they are set to bring to their desktop Mac Pro computers during 2021 and 2022, which means to expect much more powerful Mac computers compared to that what we have grown accustomed to, all whilst consuming much less power, so will run quieter than Intel Macs, though with the ability for users to upgrade. So the Mac ecosystem won't be killing off Windows desktop PCs anytime soon, given the flexibility that they continue to offer. That and AMD's innovations have prevented that market from dying along with Intel. That and not wanting to be locked into highly restricted Apple ecosystem that up until the release of M1 systems did not represent good value for money in terms of performance versus cost. Also, whilst the M1 MacBooks now effectively only match similarly priced Intel laptops such as the Dell's XPS in terms of performance per cost, which illustrates how bad value for money Apple hardware tends to be, despite which a large segment of the general public continue to buy into Apple's marketing hype, happy to get ripped off, basically paying double for the same performance as over a Windows system. Hence Apple's huge profit margins and why the market is valuing Apple stock price so highly. And another reason to avoid Apple tech was brought home to iPhone users during 2017 when they discovered that Apple was deliberately slowing down their old phones so users would be prompted become more eager to upgrade to the newer, faster core models. In fact, if I were going to use macOS, I would probably use a x86 Hackintosh system. What's an Hackintosh? Well, it's basically a Windows PC. It doesn't use Apple components, just off-the-shelf components, GPU, CPU, motherboards, memory, hard drives. And it's basically a Windows PC that dual boots a hacked version of macOS, so you get a Mac without paying more than double what and with a similar performing Mac would cost. But now all of that's changed with its M1 processor. Apple has pulled one out of the hat, and we can all eagerly wait that M1X is likely to deliver to the desktop arena during 2021. For instance, I can easily imagine Mac desktops comprising several M1X chiplets, much as AMD processors comprise 8-core chiplets. It could be as simple as taking two M1 processors and linking them up to result in a 16-core machine, which is basically what AMD has done with its Ryzen and Threadripper and EPYC processors. And why stop at 16? You could have 24 core, 32 core, even 64 core processing monsters could be just around the corner that Apple could charge inflated prices for, which I'm sure is what Apple are working on right now. For it has already been done by AMD, and not in terms of the whole package of processor, i.e. GPU and memory all on one die. In comparison, the most powerful desktop Mac Pro today comprises the 28-core Intel Xeon that starts at $5,500 for an 8-core machine, Opt for the 28 core Xeon and the price jumps to £12,500, which in my opinion is a total rip-off. For instance, I could configure a more powerful 32 core Threadripper build for less than half the price that a Mac Pro costs at £12,500. In fact, the build would come in at about £5,000, or at 40% of what Apple charges for its Mac Pros, which is why I've never owned anything from Apple, no matter the marketing hype. Anyway, that's the past. The future is Apple Silicon. M1 and beyond 64 core Macs are definitely coming. If not in 2021, then in 2022, which I am sure Apple will sell at inflated prices as Apple customers appear content to continue to get ripped off, which is good for Apple stockholders and even worse for Intel, as that none of this was necessary. For Intel had the opportunity way back in 2006 to develop and supply the processors for Apple's then new smartphones, the iPhone, but they turned Apple down due to forecasts or lack of volume to justify the investment, and thus sowed the seeds for today's total departure from Intel due to Apple porting over their Apple/ARM/Samsung smartphone technology to laptops, and during 2021 to Mac desktops. The decision for which was likely taken on launch of Intel Skylake processors in 2015 that were just awful, full of bugs, prompting Apple engineers to conclude that we could do a better job than this garbage, and the rest is history, as Intel's failure to innovate has continued since, resulting in Apple Silicon now passing Intel processors, all whilst consuming far less energy due to being based on smartphone technology being ported over to laptops and soon desktops. So Apple is definitely not a stock to listen to any doom agents out there, as it benefits from its AI division delivering huge leaps in performance on developing its M1 processor that incorporates a 16-core neural engine right into every laptop and desktop that help boost performance in machine learning tasks. Meanwhile, Intel continues to die its slow death, not only at the hands of AMD but now also at the hands of Apple due to failure to innovate, and it's even possible that the M1 chip could mark the beginnings of the demise of the x86 processors, which means that AMD in the not too distant future could also be fighting for survival. If Apple continues on its current trend trajectory, something to definitely keep an eye on, and the reason why Apple stock is primary. Anyway, if you're thinking of buying a desktop Mac Pro, then don't. Because the next generation will be vastly more powerful than what's being sold today, with processing power of up to 64 cores for probably less money than today's 28 core. Don't be surprised that Apple stock price has not reacted higher to the launch of the M1 MacBooks, as the stock had already been bid up to a very high EC valuation of 75. In terms of the chart, then we are seeing the near exact same pattern as for Microsoft and Amazon, i.e. a holding pattern as markets digest the recent bull run, waiting on corporate earnings to reduce valuation before the next leg higher. The reaction from $137 is high is corrective, unwinding a heavily overbought state that looks like it's just about run its course. So just like Amazon and Microsoft, the downside looks limited, perhaps eyeing no more than a move to 110 and 106 at best. Therefore, buying level for Apple is 110 before the next bull run begins, though likely at a more measured pace than earlier this year, which was frenetic. Again, the whole of this extensive analysis has already first been made available to patrons who support my work. So, for immediate first access to all of my analysis and trend forecasts, then do consider becoming a patron by supporting my work for just $3 per month. And just an example, What do you think my forecast was for where the Dow would end 2020 right at the beginning of 2020? Guess. 30,750 to 31,000. Where is it trading now? Go and have a look at the chart and make up your mind whether you should subscribe, become a patron for just $3 per month. Anyway, I'm going to say Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all. And here's a Christmas message for my budgies. And do consider becoming a patron, because there's going to be a lot more opportunity during 2021, 2022 and beyond.